Over the past few years, streaming services have absolutely exploded in popularity. You got Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, Max, Prime Video, Apple TV+. The list goes on and on and on and on. It's very clear that every single one of these companies is desperate to claim its stake in the so-called streaming cash cow. But what's the best way to do that? Well, it's to build up a strong catalog of content that not only gets people to subscribe, but stay subscribed. And this is exactly what many of these platforms have done. As a result, we've seen a massive influx in original content. But the craziest part of all is that a lot of this content is really good. I mean, we've been blessed with some fantastic streaming shows in recent years. What started out as a few standout stories here and there has turned into a well-oiled machine that pumps out high-quality shows on a consistent basis. It feels like practically every other week there's a new show or a new season of a show coming out that's must-watch television. Just this year, we've already gotten Invincible Season 3, White Lotus Season 3, Severance Season 2, The Studio, Adolescence, not you, Daredevil Born Again, Andor Season 2, and I'm probably missing a couple, not to mention all of the shows coming up on the horizon. While the movie business is basically going through an identity crisis right now, and network television has been on a slow descent for years, streaming TV seems to be booming. Of course, that's not to say there haven't been some misfires. There definitely have been. The streaming business is not without its faults, but it has paved the way for a ton of great shows to be made. With so much competition in this space, companies have been forced to put as much effort as possible into producing, acquiring, and distributing shows that people genuinely want to watch. What we're witnessing is essentially an arms race amongst all of the streaming platforms to create the best shows possible, and this has had a profound impact on the film industry as we know it. The 20-plus episode programs of the past have been succeeded by shows with shorter seasons and tighter narratives that feel more akin to films in the way they're produced. And the days of consistent billion-dollar box office hits seem to be dwindling as more alternative sources of media become available. To put it simply, streaming shows combine the best aspects of serial television and film, which has opened the door for tons of talented creators to tell stories that never could have seen the light of day just a decade ago. But is this actually a good thing? Or is this whole operation headed for certain disaster? Well, let's try to find out.
So my friend started working at this new streaming service. She mentioned it to her boss, who got really excited and wants to hop on the phone with you tomorrow because they're desperate for content and maybe they could save the show.
In the early days, there was a pretty distinct line in the sand that separated the old school format of network television and the new era of streaming. But over time, that line has blurred significantly and the general perception surrounding modern television has changed. For example, one of the most notable differences when streaming first entered the conversation was the binge release model, popularized by Netflix. Instead of having to wait weeks or even months on end for a season-long narrative to run its course, the entire thing was suddenly at your disposal in just one sitting. This was, and still is, a total game changer for impatient people who don't want to wait week to week for a story to unfold. Several services followed in Netflix's footsteps with this release model, and the binge soon became synonymous with streaming. Yet, if you look around today, most services have reverted back to a weekly release schedule for their shows. The Boys notoriously started out with a binge release model, but switched over to weekly for season 2, which caused maybe a wee bit of outrage. But the show has benefited more in the long term as a result of this change. See, with a binge release of season 1, The Boys was quickly able to gain traction and popularity within mainstream media. Once it had reached that level of popularity, opting for a weekly release allowed the show to stay in the conversation for a longer period of time. So they basically got the best of both worlds, apart from the whole review bombing and everything. This is essentially a small-scale version of what happened across all of the streaming platforms. Early on, the binge model was used to help differentiate streaming shows from their network counterparts. But now that a lot of people are bought in on streaming, most services have reverted back to a release strategy that's been working for decades. Even Netflix, OG of the binge, has experimented with different kinds of release schedules because it ultimately benefits shows more and keeps them relevant. Another differentiating factor early on was something streaming shows actually lacked when compared to network TV, and that is the commercial break. Imagine you're watching your favorite show and you're fully immersed in the story. One of the characters makes a groundbreaking revelation that's been building up for 5 seasons and has huge implications on the outcome of the story, when all of a sudden, Whopper. More often than not, commercial breaks completely disrupt the natural flow of most TV shows. When Netflix entered the streaming business, it opted to go the HBO route and remove commercials for a more premium experience. And I think most people can agree that ad-free viewing is a better way to watch TV. This isn't just exclusive to streaming originals either. Breaking Bad is a show that aired with commercials on cable, but has also had a huge life on Netflix, which was really the catalyst that led to its monumental popularity. When a story is carefully crafted and intentionally paced, it's jarring to be ejected from it every few minutes just to learn about some medication with like 200 life-threatening side effects. And yes, I know right now someone is probably typing in the comments, well, if commercials ruin the viewing experience so much, why don't you take them out of your videos? That's a valid argument, I'll give you that. But first off, ads are now inevitable on YouTube, even for videos that aren't monetized, so I couldn't remove them even if I wanted to. And secondly,
I like money.
But I digress. As more people have adopted streaming, companies have, of course, found ways to reintegrate commercials into their platforms, because I'm sure they like money too. That being said, pretty much every streaming service has some sort of ad-free version at an additional cost. Say what you will about this cash grab tactic, but it is clear that commercials aren't as much of a priority as they used to be, because the services themselves aren't solely reliant on ads for revenue. And I'd say this has had a net positive impact on the content, because the absence of commercials doesn't just affect your viewing experience when watching a show, it has an effect on how the show itself is made. Without commercial breaks being baked into a show's runtime, creators have a lot more freedom to structure episodes in ways that make the most sense for the story. The narrative can flow seamlessly, and it opens the door for more unconventional storytelling methods. This leads us to the last major difference between network TV and streaming: show structure. Network TV shows have to fit within a very strict mold. Episodes are usually between 30 minutes to an hour in length, with a portion of that time being devoted to commercials. Seasons are also fairly long, typically between 20 and 24 episodes. Yet, despite having all those episodes, entire seasons are often pumped out once a year. Most streaming shows, on the other hand, have taken a drastically different approach to their productions. First off, the average episode length of a streaming original can vary a lot. Severance has episodes that range from right around 30 minutes to well over an hour. And Stranger Things has multiple episodes that are as long as feature-length films. Without the need to cram episodes into a designated time slot, there's a lot more flexibility in the ways shows can be paced. Seasons also tend to be a lot shorter than network shows, ranging from 4 to 10 episodes. While some people might consider this a downside, it undoubtedly results in stories that aren't stuffed with unnecessary plot lines for the sake of filling out a broadcast schedule. Seasons are crafted with much more intentionality and care, and since each season requires a lot more time and effort to make, most of these shows don't come out on a yearly basis. Stranger Things is an example of a show that's notorious for having super long periods of time in between each season. I mean, it's taken almost a decade to release 4 seasons. Those kids are practically ready for retirement by now. But I can pretty much guarantee that the series as a whole is a lot stronger than if all 4 seasons had been rushed out the door in consecutive years. Now, unlike the binge release model and ad-free viewing experience, this format has more or less stayed the same for most streaming shows being produced today. And many of them are successful precisely because of the emphasis on high-quality storytelling. But it also means that these shows have a distinctly different feeling to them. They no longer feel like serial television in the classical sense. A lot of people like to say that streaming shows kind of just feel like really long movies now, which is true. Many of these shows are being produced and structured more like movies than they are old school television. But this is 100% by design, because streaming shows aren't just competing with network television, they're directly targeting the movie industry as well.
I don't think we have been to the movies since Barbenheimer.
Oh, that was years ago.
We stream everything now.
Oh, well, you should come back. We'd love to have you.
It's not hard to see the many similarities that streaming shows share with modern movies. But there is one crucial difference that sets the two apart: box office performance. In the eyes of studio execs and producers, box office numbers are everything. The film industry is a business after all, and studios want to make profit. The problem is, box office performance doesn't always correlate directly with the quality of a film. Good and great movies underperform at the box office all the time. And even though these numbers should only be something people in Hollywood are concerned about, everyday people take them into consideration too. There are people out there who will see an article headline about a film underperforming at the box office and automatically assume it's not worth watching, even if that's not the case. Mickey 17 is a recent example of a solid film from an award-winning director featuring an A-list actor that completely failed to draw people in. Maybe we're too far removed from the hype around Parasite, maybe there was a disconnect somewhere in the marketing, or maybe some people just didn't feel this story was worth seeing in theaters. Regardless, Mickey 17 fell short of expectations. And this actually spurred the Warner Brothers CEO to announce that from now on they're going to stop producing smaller scale original stories and instead start prioritizing larger pre-existing IPs. Yet, this is the opposite of what's happening over on streaming. A few years ago, Severance, White Lotus, The Bear, Squid Game, and Stranger Things were not established IPs. They didn't have built-in fan bases to fall back on, and they were all risks. But those risks paid off because the metric for success is different on streaming. The average streaming show has a much more long-term goal than any film being released in theaters. Yes, companies track viewership and bumps in subscriber count, but that's not the sole focus of most streaming shows. Pretty much all of these services want to build up their own unique catalog of content and establish a strong reputation, because that's what will ultimately keep people subscribed. They don't just make money off of one property, they make money off of all of them. This is why many of these companies are okay with throwing loads of money at shows without seeing immediate results. Apple is reportedly losing $1 billion a year on content costs for Apple TV+. Yes, you heard that right, billion with a B. Season 2 of Severance alone cost over $200 million due to production holdups and complications behind the scenes. But Apple is able to justify that cost because of what having a show like Severance can do for the platform moving forward. And it's not like Apple is strapped for cash or anything. When taking a look at a film like Mickey 17, we don't consider all of the other financially successful films Warner Bros. Has produced in the past. The film is viewed individually, and its success is measured in concrete metrics, like earnings and awards. If a film doesn't bring in either of these, it's, by all accounts, a flop in the eyes of the studio, regardless of how good it might actually be from an artistic standpoint. Don't get me wrong, there are streaming shows that get canceled for not reaching a certain standard. Netflix alone has a graveyard of scrap projects, some of them pretty good too. But since these shows are viewed through a different lens, it's often easier for them to succeed. Not to mention, the odds are significantly stacked in their favor. Streaming has continued to become a more popular option while most movie theaters are struggling just to get people through their doors.
They have taken 100 years of cinema and diminished it to an app.
Some of the most talented and well-respected filmmakers in the industry talk about the importance of going to the cinema to experience these stories on the silver screen. And as a lover of film, I wholeheartedly agree. A great movie theater experience can have a profound impact on your perception of a film. But there are also certain variables that filmmakers just can't control. It's not Christopher Nolan's fault that someone might be sitting 3 rows ahead of you while playing Candy Crush on their phone at full brightness throughout the entire 180 minutes of Oppenheimer. A terrible movie theater experience can just as easily ruin your perception of a film you may have liked otherwise. Streaming allows people to experience great stories in their own homes, under their own conditions, which is something that can't be overlooked. This is the primary reason more and more people are turning to streaming for on-demand entertainment. And it's also why more and more talented creators are heading to streaming platforms to tell their stories. Over the last few years, it's become very apparent that there's more freedom for creators working on streaming projects than there is for those working on theatrical releases. But even streaming movies don't have the best track record of being consistently great. It's the shows that really hold these platforms up. And this has to do a lot with creators being given exactly what they need to craft compelling stories that keep people coming back week after week.
From the very beginning, we wanted to create an environment that was freeing and not stifling. You hire smart people, you give them the right support, and then you let them do their work.
Let me preface this section of the video by stating that I have not worked on any streaming productions, so I don't really know what things are like behind the scenes. And I could definitely be getting some of this wrong. That being said, from everything I found in my research for this video, it seems like there's a lot of freedom in the creation of these shows, at least when compared to conventional film and television productions. You'd think with so much money on the line, studios would be hyper vigilant about managing these projects to death. But for the most part, it kind of sounds like the opposite. And this shows in the type of projects that are being greenlit and the ways in which these stories are being told. Netflix is of course the king of streaming, responsible for giving us a plethora of iconic shows over the years. But the one thing pretty much all of these shows have in common is a distinct creative vision behind them. Squid Game is currently the most popular show on Netflix, which is already a pretty insane achievement considering it's an international series, and those have historically had trouble gaining widespread traction in English-speaking countries like America. But this series is also dark and extremely graphic, yet it works because there's a very clear vision for the story. The style is tangible and the narrative is told in a really compelling way, which I'm sure has helped overcome the language barrier for many people. And I guess it's also because there's like a ton of dub versions for people who are scared of reading or whatever.
Grandma? Don't you ever call me that!
Truth is, it simply would have been impossible for a show like Squid Game to reach as large of an audience as it has without having a streaming service behind it. The creator, Hwang Dong-hyuk, definitely butchered that, was given the budget he needed and the liberty to tell a story that has very clearly resonated with people all over the world. A slightly different but just as fitting example is Adolescence, which is one of the newer releases on Netflix. This is a limited series featuring just 4 episodes, all of which play out as a single continuous shot. The story revolves around a murder case, but it's not told in a conventional way by any means. There aren't any major plot twists or groundbreaking revelations, the arrest isn't cathartic, and there really isn't even a main character that we follow throughout each episode. What we get is simply an uncomfortable yet very accurate depiction of how a case like this would unfold in real life. Again, this isn't the kind of show that ever could have been made a decade ago, at least not in this way. The story definitely could have been told like any other procedural murder mystery, but that would have defeated the whole purpose of the series. Adolescence works because of the unique way it approaches a story like this and the sheer technical marvel of how these episodes were captured. But it's not just Netflix that's allowing unique and creative stories to be told. Several other platforms have found success in bringing on talented creatives to develop standout properties. Mike White is the creative mind behind White Lotus, which is one of the most popular shows on Max right now. Oh, hold on. As I'm recording this, they literally just announced that they're changing it back to HBO Max. Okay, well, I guess from now on it's HBO Max. Anyway, White had been working in the film industry for years as a writer, but never had as much creative freedom handed to him as he has with White Lotus. And yet, the show has become a massive hit and currently offers 3 very high-quality seasons of television, which is even more impressive when you consider that Mike White wrote and directed all 21 episodes of this series. That's pretty much the equivalent of writing and directing 14 feature-length films in 5 years. An absolutely insane undertaking that even he admitted had a negative impact on his health.
And basically what happened on the second season was I got so run down afterwards. I was like, I don't think I'll ever not be tired again.
But it's paid off because White's creative vision and attention to detail shines through in every single episode of this series. It doesn't just feel like a piece of content. Each season features an interesting story with complex characters, which is why people have fallen in love with this series.
Maybe what I really want is to be one of these Asian girls.
Really? Not really.
No, really.
Really?
Dan Erickson is another creator to look at. He's the man behind the story of Severance, a weird and oftentimes unsettling show that's not really that easy to watch. And while all of that might sound like a recipe for disaster, Severance has quickly become a top-performing series on Apple TV+. One of the biggest reasons for this success is because of how different this series feels compared to almost everything else out there right now. This is a show that asks a lot from its audience, and it doesn't shy away from tackling disturbing topics that relate to autonomy, humanity, and the corporate machine. I think it's also important to note that Erickson basically had no credits to his name before this series. He was literally working as a Postmates driver when he landed his first meeting with Ben Stiller to talk about getting the show produced.
And this is true, I was driving for Postmates at the time. Like I was not working in the industry in any way. And then suddenly I'm told, you know, Ben Stiller wants to talk about producing this thing. And so I was very nervous going into that meeting.
There's actually a pretty clear trend of relatively small and unknown creators hitting it out of the park with their first shows. Hardly anybody knew who the Duffer Brothers were before they turned Stranger Things into a massive property. And Lee Sung-jin had only worked on a handful of projects before dropping one of the best shows I've ever seen in Beef. From an outside perspective, it honestly seems like streaming TV has become a new haven for talented creators who want to bring their visions to life. And the same is true for actors. There have been countless actors whose careers have skyrocketed after starring in these shows, and a decent amount of actors who have had their careers revived as a result of these shows too. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, these companies have carved a path for creatives to tell their stories with minimal studio interference. And I'd say it's worked extremely well. I think people can intuitively tell when there's a strong, singular vision behind a story, and when something is just being manufactured to have as much mass appeal as possible. I'd say the biggest downside to all of this is that there have been so many great shows released in such a short amount of time that some of them have flown completely under the radar. I've never heard another soul talk about Catch-22 on Hulu, but it's a hilarious and really well-made series that I'd recommend to almost anyone. Not to mention, we've really only been focusing on scripted television here. I haven't even touched on the plethora of reality TV and documentary series that have come out on streaming too. These are often cheaper to produce than scripted television, and many of them have been just as successful, if not more so. It's no wonder Netflix is trying to make A Love is Blind for like every country on earth. But even with the explosion of unique and creative content on these platforms, there are some pretty glaring concerns about the streaming business model and its potential future.
And apparently he's been stealing Netflix by using his mother's account.
That is not fair for the rest of us who have to pay for Netflix.
You have to pay for Netflix?
As I've been hinting at throughout this video, the streaming business is not all sunshine and rainbows. There are some serious issues plaguing this industry that will probably only get worse as time goes on. The most obvious issue is, of course, sustainability. These shows are expensive to make, and we've already established that profitability is difficult to achieve. Show budgets have continued ballooning to record-breaking numbers, and although this has led to higher quality productions, it also makes seeing financial returns that much harder. Platforms like Netflix and Hulu have proven that it is possible to reach profitability, but they've been at this game longer than anyone else. A few other services have also just recently begun making profit, but it's a long road to get there. And I'm not sure all of these platforms are going to survive, especially if streaming fatigue really starts to kick in, which is another major issue. It's a pretty safe bet to say there aren't a lot of people out there who love the idea of subscribing to a million different services just for access to this content. Streaming started out as a cheaper alternative to cable, but now with every service under the sun, affordability isn't really a selling point anymore. I think a lot of people have already started to be very selective about which services they choose to subscribe to regularly. And this means that all of these platforms are gonna have to duke it out in the arena for a spot in people's wallets. And while on the topic of money, there's also the logistical issues around paying talent fairly. Despite many of these shows being incredibly popular, it's pretty well known that a lot of talent behind the scenes don't receive as much money as they used to with network television. The conversation surrounding residual pay for talent is partially what led to the huge writer's strike in 2023. And while some progress has been made in this area, it's still an issue people deal with to this day. And finally, there is the overwhelming concern that physical media is essentially going extinct directly due to the rise of streaming. With everything being online these days, there's less of a need to physically acquire these shows and movies. If this trend continues, there might come a day where we own nothing, but we still pay a premium price regardless. So yeah, there are some valid concerns here, and I can definitely understand why some people might not be as enthusiastic as I am about the shows we've been getting. Although, it also seems like a lot of people think that TV has gotten worse over the years, which I have a hard time wrapping my head around. There's definitely more television being produced today than maybe there ever has been, and not all of it is great, but I genuinely believe the average show today is much better made than the average show 30 years ago. The baseline really seems to have gotten a lot higher because there's so much competition out there. And even most of the quote-unquote mediocre shows still offer a solid reason to tune in. Now, some people might attribute this to the idea that streaming has reduced television down to soulless content. But I think that's a total disservice to the truly fantastic stories that have come from this shift in the industry. You cannot honestly tell me that this has any less of a soul than this.
I am a surgeon! I am a surgeon!
Yes, it might be easy to criticize the current state of streaming television, but I think it's also important to highlight the best aspects of it. Besides, it seems like many of these companies are already aware of the criticisms and have addressed them directly through their shows. Netflix literally has an episode of Black Mirror all about a shady streaming service that is not at all subtle about who it's making fun of. Amazon makes similar jokes in a show all about exposing the corruption behind the most powerful people and companies in the world, which is a little ironic to say the least. And Apple has a show about a morally ambiguous tech company with the primary goal of controlling people. I mean, you gotta hand it to these companies for at least allowing creators to critique the irony of the whole situation. But I think the most potent example that sums up the current state of the entertainment industry better than anything else is The Studio. This story is centered around the production of movies, and through it, we explore the ups and downs of filmmaking. Despite all of the crazy mishaps and shenanigans that happen in this story, it feels like a genuine love letter to the art of film. Yet, ironically, it's being produced as a television series. If The Studio were made as a movie, it would probably have a budget that pales in comparison to what the show has, and there's a decent chance it wouldn't even break even at the box office. But since this story is being told as a streaming series, there's much more room to explore this world and these characters. There are tons of hilarious cameos from some pretty big names in the industry, and the series itself was actually filmed in Hollywood, which is incredibly rare these days. I feel like this show kind of succeeds in its goal to honor the film industry, but it does so as a streaming series. And if that's not pretty telling about the current climate, I don't really know what is. Now, will things be this way forever? Absolutely not. I think the tides will turn again, and these types of shows will eventually be replaced by something else. So if you take anything from this video, I'd say enjoy it while it lasts. There's a ton of great TV out there right now for people with all different kinds of tastes. Of course, that's just my opinion though. What do you think? Are you a fan of the way streaming shows have influenced TV over the past few years? Or do you hate the current direction and wish everything would just go back to the way it used to be? Do you think there's anything I missed or anything I got completely wrong in this video? Let me know in the comments down below.
I thought you were dead.
My death was greatly exaggerated.
It's been a minute since I posted my last video, in which I also claimed,
I'm thinking I'm back.
As you can see, I was, in fact, not back, because it's been 9 months. That means somewhere out there right now is a newborn baby that literally didn't even exist the last time I made a video. Probably just chilling in a crib or something.
Jesus.
So yeah, it's been kind of a long time, and a lot of you have let me know that. But where have I been? Well, good question. To be honest with you, I don't really have a good answer, other than that I let life get in the way. I've been prioritizing pretty much everything else going on with work and my personal life over making these videos. And while some of those were definitely justified, I'll be the first to admit that I haven't been putting my best foot forward when it comes to getting out my next project. It's not that I haven't wanted to make one. Trust me, I've spent the last 9 months working on several different scripts, but I just never got to the point where they felt finished. I'd either get halfway through, then hit a wall, or I'd make a ton of progress, but I'd start to doubt myself and inevitably start over from scratch. It's been a pretty bad creative rut, and probably some of the worst writer's block I've ever experienced. But if you're watching this video right now, well, that means I finally managed to break through it. Honestly, I don't even care if this video gets 1,000 views or 1,000,000 views. I just care that it actually gets made. And as I speak these very words, that goal becomes reality. So, what's the good news? Well, I've got about half a dozen partially written scripts on the back burner that I do plan to release at some point. I also want to experiment with some different types of videos that I think could not only keep things fresh for you as viewers, but for me as well. So I assure you, there is more on the way. And this time it won't take 9 months. Hopefully. Maybe more like 7. I'm kidding. If any of that sounds interesting to you, hey, maybe consider subscribing. I honestly can't believe this channel is almost at 25,000 subscribers, and I've pretty much been asleep at the wheel most of the way there. Thank you all for giving me your support and for watching my videos. Even though I haven't been posting, I've still been peeking at comments here and there. I really appreciate everyone who's left positive messages, and I've even had some people reach out to me personally just to say how much they like my content. All of you have helped me stay focused and motivated to get my next project finished.
And I love you, random citizen.
Speaking of which, I already have another video in the works as we speak, and I think that'll be a pretty interesting one. So make sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you all next time.